The fourth week of Advent is usually the time we stop and we take some time to look at Mary. Now, Mary is an interesting historic character. It's been said that Jesus is the most talked about character in the West, and Mary is number two. So we have a relationship with this character, this woman who lived 2,000 years ago. But one of the things that's been done to her is that she's kind of been put into a gilded cage. She's had her sexuality stripped completely. She has had any of her humanity removed or restricted. We have carols about her where she's meek and mild and slow and somber and just quietly watching passively what's going on. But the scripture does not back that up. Mary in the scripture that Luke shows us this morning is someone full of fire and questions and passion and bravery. This morning we're looking at the passage where it's called the Annunciation, where Mary is told about Jesus' birth. And she asks the angel, how's that possible? Because I haven't slept with anybody. And the angel says, all things are possible in God. Your cousin Elizabeth, who didn't think could have a child, has one on the way. And this is a pattern that we see in Hebrew scripture. Sarah was told this. Hannah was told this. There are a lot of women, like this was the big announcement. So within a Hebrew context, being told that God can make you pregnant was really not as strange as it sounds to the modern ear. And here was Mary, a young woman who was probably 15, 16. Now, I want to unpack that a little bit. There's a lot of talk right now that she was a 14-year-old teenager with no autonomy, and the most extreme versions of that is that she was forced into the situation. I had a teenager ask me about that just last year. Like, what do we do with this? Because this is what people are saying about Mary, is that she was forced to give birth to Jesus. Raped is the word that was actually used. And I kind of shocked for a little bit, and then I took down the Bible and said, okay, let's read through Luke together. We don't know Mary's age. She probably had just come of age a year or two before. Now, we also have to take into account that we're talking about a culture where people were not well nourished. So for her, hitting puberty was probably a 14, 15-year-old kind of thing. It certainly wasn't the 11, 12-year-olds that we have today. So 13, 14, 15, she would have stayed at home for a little while, learning how to take care of her own household, because that's what they did. There's an assumption that she was illiterate, so I have to correct that a little bit too. Women could read, men could read. The majority of them read no problem. They read Holy Script all the time. They were educated, both men and women, because they had to educate the next generation. They had to raise them to know what's what. But they weren't necessarily literate in the way we did, because they didn't have the resources that we have. They didn't have the pens and paper that we could just toss off as little ones learn how to print in our society. So without that kind of an opportunity, reading and writing were not taught together. So while she could read and was educated to the standards of the people of the day, she probably could not write for herself. Does not mean she was uneducated. So this 15, 16-year-old young woman, at a time when there was no concept of adolescence and teenagerhood. There was before you were old enough and there was after you were old enough. And the majority of people died prior to the age of 10. So if you live to 10, you hit puberty, you probably have a relatively decent lifespan ahead of you. 40, 50. Childbirth took care of a lot of women. War took care of a lot of men. Accidents around the house took care of both. So there was definitely deaths and hard things happened. But generally speaking, Mary was relatively comfortable in a peasant world that she lived in. She would have been educated. She would have been old enough to not necessarily make her own decisions, but certainly have an opinion. There's a myth out there that ancient cultures, women had no say over what happened to them, and that's just false. Women had say. They might not have had the final decision, but they certainly had say. And Mary's father probably would have presented this to her. But in a situation where daughters who had reached puberty were often kidnapped by the Roman officials and sold into prostitution, marriage was something that was worth considering, because if you were married, you were not going to be kidnapped by the Romans. So all of these things came into play. And Mary would have seen people around her die of childbirth. She would have seen friends disappear. She would have seen accidental deaths happening. She would have seen all the hard things of life that were part of the culture that she was raised in. So she would not have been a naive little bunny who didn't know how to make a choice or what those choices meant. So we get a young woman who is approached by an angel. And again, it happens in Hebrew scripture frequently enough that although it might have upset her and startled her, it wouldn't have been unheard of. She would have been able to talk with other people about it. Might not have believed her, but it would have been something that was at least accepted as a possibility. And one of the first things she does is she asks questions. This is not a woman who didn't have agency. This is a woman who had the power to be able to say, "Why me? What are you talking about?" And then the angel informed her that she was blessed. She was great, full of grace, that God chose her to be the mother of the incarnate child. Now, the power in that is that Mary was not blessed because she had Jesus. She had Jesus because she was blessed. She was already a fully recognized, independent woman, able to make her own choices, knowing the consequences. She was betrothed, but she wasn't married. She hadn't yet slept with Joseph. She hadn't yet left her parents' home. She knew the risks, not only to her for carrying a pregnancy and the number of people who died in childbirth, but also the possibility of social ostracization, maybe stoned to death. Knowing all of that, she made a choice. And she said, "Okay, I am God's servant. Do as God likes. I am here. I'm the vessel." And there begins one of the most incredible stories in the world, the birth of God into human form. Now, we're the only culture that really believes in that. There's other cultures that have time to time have said that God transformed into human form. Greek mythology has that happening all the time. So does Egyptian and Roman and Mesopotamian. But we're the only tradition, Christianity is the only tradition that says God became human to be relatable, to live like us, to become fully human, to be vulnerable in a human body. There's a heresy that goes right back to the early church called asceticism. And that heresy says that Jesus' corporeal body was an illusion. It was like diaset is actually means phantom in Greek, that he wasn't really human. And it's a heresy that we bring up again and again and again. And one of the ways we bring up that heresy is by denying the humanity of Mary. We, as I said, put her in this gilded cage. We strip her of her sexuality. The Orthodox and Catholic churches are completely believe that she was a virgin till death, that she never had any other children, that it was only ever Jesus, and Joseph married her when he was a 60-year-old man with other children of his own. There is absolutely nothing biblical to back that up. In fact, Joseph was probably in 20s, 22, when they were married, old enough to have worked a trade, but young enough that he was looking for his wife. We also strip Mary of the physicality of being a mother. I read a poem not that long ago that talked about what Mary must have gone through. Anybody who has nursed knows the pain of a child latching on. The stretch marks, the muscle contractions. She went through all of that. She wasn't meek and mild. This wasn't an easy experience. It was a lived incarnation. It means Mary went through everything that every other mother who has lived to birth a child has experienced. Vaginal birth, obviously, C-section was not an option then. She survived this and then raised her child. And that child she raised was not someone special who was never allowed to be part of his own humanity. I mean, I get delight in imagining Jesus as this little child who, rubbed snot on his arms, that said no, that ran around without a diaper on, that asked questions, asked why, wanted to know things. He was fully human. And he was fully human because that's who Mary and Joseph raised. Putting Mary in a situation where she doesn't have any of her humanity in reach takes away one of the most profound parts of Jesus, the humanity. She cried. She was in pain. She felt like her pelvis was exploding. She brought a sprawling, crying little child into the world. She struggled to what that was going to mean. She didn't have her mom as backup because, as the story tells us, they had to take off. They were in Egypt for quite some time. She had to do all of this with the help of a partner, not the community that she was prepared to have around her when she went through that. This is a woman of incredible bravery who said, yeah, I'll do that. I will take the risks. And who kept on, and who ultimately we see standing at the foot of the cross where her son is murdered. I don't want anyone to walk away with an image of Mary being meek and mild and quiet. This was a powerful, powerful woman who took it upon herself to take the gift that God gave her, with all the pain and all the uncertainty and all the questions that went with it, and raise the person we worship as Lord. She did that. This week, as we go into Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, we've got creches around us. But take some time to really look at Mary, meditate on her, see points of connection with her. Look at Joseph just beside her. One of my favorite images is of Mary passed out cold through exhaustion and Joseph holding Jesus. I saw that image this past week, and the caption read, "Why Joseph has the halo." They did this together. This couple that was nothing exceptional except in the eyes of God did this together. So this week, while your presents are all there and family is from a distance, you're connecting as you can, you're not going to have the busy that you've had in past years. So take those moments and just read the scripture and think a little bit. Who was Mary? Who is she as a model of faith? Who is she as a prophet? Because she was given the same message that so many prophets were in the Hebrew scriptures. Who is she as the forerunner? Who is she as the one who told us how to worship Jesus? Who is she? Who is this historic woman that would have been lost through time if it wasn't for the birth of her child? Find out who that is and enjoy your Christmas season.